Matt Whitaker joins us right now, the former acting U.S. Attorney General. Matt, it's always good to have you, and thank you for coming in on a Saturday, no less. Let me, I know where you're coming from, and I've heard a lot of others saying sympathetic to and loyal to the former president, even those who might personally not be, saying that this is a mischaracterization of justice and unfair. Having said all of that, though, I was reminded, Secretary, by something, or Attorney, by what Bill Barr had to say, the former Attorney General, that Mr. Trump is his own worst enemy. Quoting him here, "This would have gone nowhere had the president just returned the documents, but he jerked them around for a year and a half. And this is what happens." Do you think at least partially that's true?
Well, it's good to be with you this morning, Neil. I think this case is more complicated than just what that point you try to make. I think this case can never be divorced from the fact that a Democrat president's administration is bringing it against their former opponent and their future opponent most likely. And so, that context requires, I think, a lot more explaining. And, the point that the reporter made before this is the distinction between Hillary Clinton, Mike Pence, Joe Biden, all those different cases is not made in this indictment. And so we're going to have to either hear from Merrick Garland or Jack Smith, or we're going to have to hear from someone that has direct knowledge as to why they're going after Donald Trump and not others. And so that two-tiered system of justice, Neil, we've talked about it before, is, I think, the biggest issue here. That plus the interplay, and a lot of legal people have been talking about this, but I think there's an important question on the Presidential Records Act versus the Espionage Act and how those interplay. And I don't think until the Supreme Court ultimately hears this case and those arguments are made that we're going to know the answer to that.
You're quite right. The Presidential Record Act allows a president and a former president to access documents, and that never came up in this 49-page account. But there are some specifics here, Matthew, that make you wonder, are there some special situations with the former president that just, for want of lacking a legal term, look icky? The icky part would be the former president saying, allegedly, in these documents, among other things, wouldn't it be better if we just told them, referring to the National Archives trying to get these documents back, that we don't have anything here? And that when his lawyers told him in May 2022 that they had to comply with a grand jury subpoena seeking the return of these documents, he wouldn't answer. In the same conversation, he apparently praised the lawyer for Hillary Clinton for what he claimed was the act of deleting those 30,000 emails when she was in government. He did a great job, the former president allegedly said. That's discomforting, is it not?
Yeah, and Neil, I've signed personally hundreds of indictments when I was a U.S. attorney. And I know, there are ways to write indictments. And like you said, this is made to look as bad as possible. They brought specific examples of evidence it's a speaking indictment that tries to pile on with a lot of counts to make it look dramatic. Let's just say that. And my point is this is the high water mark for the government. You're absolutely right. I understand that, but are some of the comments themselves dramatic? On a 180 from what the former president was saying when he was running for the Oval Office in 2016, at the time, he was talking about the importance of protecting classified information, recounting at that time that he had said one of the first things we must do is enforce all classification rules and to enforce all laws relating to the handling of classified information. I think it's pretty clear that didn't happen here. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. We must protect our national secrets. However, presidents and former presidents especially are just different than an E-3 at the U.S. Navy. And what the president of the United States did, certainly they should have been more careful when moving out of the White House. But there is certainly a period of time, to your Bill Barr quote, Neil, that there needs to be an accommodation. There needs to be a way to sort through the voluminous records of a president. Obviously, the National Archives, together with the FBI, reached a point where they got frustrated and they decided to elevate this to criminal charges. And the question is, Was it a 1 year? What's the standard?
Right.
You know, how long does Joe Biden, when he leave, how long does he have to make sure that he doesn't
you raise a lot of very good
possess
points,
any of these
Matthew,
documents?
and it's possible. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt here. You're a great lawyer. I watch a lot of legal shows. That's my knowledge.
You're too kind, Neil.
But the one thing I don't understand is whether the former president understood the gravity of this and the seriousness of deflecting or delaying getting documents back to the government, or whether he knew that could be a criminal offense. Do you think he did?
Right. Well, I don't want to get inside the mind of Donald Trump, but I will tell you that I think if you look at what happened in this period of time, he thought he was under the Presidential Records Act, and probably was being told that by his lawyers, and all of a sudden the FBI determined that he was under the Espionage Act, even if he's a former president. Again, that is not explained in this indictment. The federal government has not explained it, and I still just point to that I'm very concerned when when former presidents and former leaders and current leaders of political parties are targeted by administrations. It's the natural way, and I'm not saying that anybody is above the law, but we have to have equal justice under the law, and I fear for what this portends for the future of our country, and it's going to take a lot of statesmen and stateswomen to put this, back together. We
shall see. Matthew Whitaker, very good having you on. The former acting U.S. Attorney General. Thank you, Matt.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.